Hello. Hello. Welcome to our last SubnetTALK of 2021. A hell of a year. We are very happy to welcome Rosa Menkman, who joins us from Amsterdam. Rosa is a Dutch artist and researcher, and she focuses on noise artifacts that result from accidents in both analog and digital media. And she will give us an insight into her practice, as well as an outlook on her current project. And with no further ado, I would like to pass it over to Rosa. One last point is, I would like to point out the process of a SubnetTALK is half presentation, half dialogue. So Rosa is going to give us an impulse first, and afterwards, everyone is more than welcome to voice their questions, and we hope to have a lively dialogue afterwards. So welcome and see you soon.
Hello.
And please turn off your microphone.
Thank you, Lidar, for that introduction, and Jeanette for organizing. And it's really nice to see you who are here. Some of us in the evening. Here it's dark. Others are in the day. My name is Rosa Menkman, and it's a very short talk, actually, like it's around 25 minutes. So I'm gonna talk really fast. This is a piece of my diary in 1993. So I was 10 years old, very young. And I wrote, I figured out what I want to become when I'm old. I want to either do something with gymnastics, or I want to go to space to learn to learn more about the sounds in space. And when I told this to my teacher told me, sorry, that's really nice, but you're never gonna be able to listen to sound in space simply because it's a vacuum, there are no sounds. And so like that, half of my future dreams were shattered. That's just a short introduction of my early childhood, but I think it fits really well with the things that I'm gonna talk about. This is a very old work. I'm not gonna get really into it. It's called a vernacular file formats. And in this 2010 work, I'm kind of just using one source image, a frame from a video. I compress it via different standard compression formats, bring a little noise to the code, and then what you see is the language of the file format kind of breaking through the surface of the file. I kind of learned from that way of working that there's kind of a fluidity in data. You can actually shake it, you can destroy it, you can break it, you can push it through different things. We are not usually kind of conditioned to do this. Our OSs are also operating in a very limited way, so we cannot actually push all our data back and forth. But what if we could do this? What if we, for instance, could listen to a rainbow? What would we be able to learn and uncover? This is an important thing because the visual processes, our visual processes, they function better when we see or perceive data over space rather than temporarily distributed. But if you, for instance, listen to something that develops rhythmically, then you can uncover all kinds of other things. And so, for instance, thinking through the stock markets or bodily processes, they are much more periodically organized. And so maybe while we look at graphs, we might be able to understand them better if we would listen to those graphs. And so what I started to learn is that through particular softwares like here, Audacity, you can actually sonify particular things, such as different type of messengers in the sky, and actually listen to them. And that kind of got me to something that I call resolution studies. So a resolution is kind of a standardization of how things function. But what we don't think through too often is also the compromises resolutions involve. And so what I'm trying to do is create tools and ways of thinking through compromises. And I started to kind of describe that as something I call shadow knowledge. I think through shadows as the liminal spaces where things can still be molded, where they're not having like this very set, rigid form. There are places where we don't really know how to interpret, and we can pivot around it. We can like kind of find new ways to shed a light, to kind of visualize and attack these places. And with a proposal on how to do this, I won the residency at CERN, the Collide at CERN residency. This is me in my CERN outfit. Just to give like a very quick introduction, CERN is what they call the biggest experiment in the world. It's the home to the Large Hadron Collider. That's the yellow kind of like circle, which is under the ground. And it's a place where they shoot particles both the left and the right way of this ring. Then in 4 major experiments, they collide, they come together, they make an event. And that's where the scientists try to find knowledge about the Big Bang, about all kinds of parts of our unknown world, physics. In CERN, I spoke to one particular scientist. His name is Harrison Prosper. And I told him about this dream I had when I was young, to listen to the sounds in the universe and to uncover new sounds. And actually what he did was very beautiful. He told me that since a long time, every time he takes his daughter out in the mountains or hiking, etc., he tells her that, look, when you look at the sky, what you really see is the reverb of the loudest sound that ever happened, the Big Bang. And so what he was teaching his child is actually, there are all kinds of sounds in space. It just depends what kind of lenses, what kind of ways you use to sense them. In this case, our temporal lenses, clearly, besides our temporal lens, there's many lenses that we're not using properly to look at the sounds in the sky. And this gave me kind of like a new will to do this research. But also what I found was that shadow knowledge, so the research that I applied with to CERN, was actually way too metaphorical. It was very poetic, and to kind of talk with scientists and try to get them to talk about their shadows, their compromises and their biases was very, very, very hard. And what I needed to do, I realized, is like kind of reformulate this research. And what was really nice during the residency is that I had 2 scientific advisors. And with one of them, I rewrote my question into a more physics kind of language question, which is about impossible images. And the question went like, imagine you could obtain an impossible image of any object or phenomenon that you think is important, with no limits on spatial, temporal, energy, signal to noise, or cost resolutions. What image would you create? The short version, the more easy version, is just like, imagine you could obtain an impossible image. What image would you create? And so what I did is I took this image, and CERN organized kind of like daily meetings with scientists. And I would go and I would try to understand who they are. And while we were having this conversation, at some point I would slip in this question and I would collect their answers. And from that, I got this very big list of impossible images. And some of them were very dreamy. Some of them were actually metaphors, but others were very much grounded in physics. So here are just a few. It's like a preliminary categorization, I would say. Images that are impossible due to spatial resolution, images that are impossible due to time resolutions, historically impossible images, or images that are based only in speculation, disbelief, or imagination. And then finally, there was also images that can only be inferred. I kind of took all these different types of images, and what I realized is that if I really try to talk and explain why our sensing mechanisms sometimes have kind of issues to not collect these images, I need to talk about the sensing mechanisms in a more like skilled out way. And so I wanted to try to explain that and talk more to scientists about it. And again, I ran into a real problem. I had no way to kind of find the language. And that was until I talked to a physicist here, Xavier Lurie. He works for the Gaia project, which is a satellite that goes through our universe and collects the information and tries to map it. And he came with two words that are actually very normal. He said, you're just talking about different messengers that go through different windows. And when I had those two words, I started to kind of really be able to create a tool to talk about compromises in our sensing, our image processing technologies, because the compromises, they happen on multiple levels. They happen on the part of the messenger, on the part of the window, where usually we also talk about Shannon and Weaver and the mathematical transform for communication. And also this latent image, which comes through this space, through this formulation. You can kind of see it here. It's not very clear. I don't want to go into it too much now, but what I did with this tool for recalibrating compromise is I wanted to kind of bring it back to the level of art. And that's really hard when you do research in a space that is so scientific and you create, you have this whole collection of impossible images. How do you kind of bring this back to the space of art? And one option for me was through this work. It's kind of like a virtual exhibition of impossible images. It's called The Blob of Impossible Images. It became kind of a virtual collection of impossible images. So here, for instance, you see the portal, which is made from the shadow of dark matter, which is an impossible image. And then I would position all these different, or a few of these different impossible images inside the blob. And the blob was kind of cut by axes. And these axes kind of impose different types of compromises from either a messenger, a window, or another type of compromising space. Here we have the sound part. Okay, that was during COVID. What was really beautiful is that in other places in the world, they started to have physical exhibitions again. One of them here is in China, in Guizhou. And there, the blob was also exhibited in, it was printed over the walls. And then there was an actual interface towards the virtual space. Another very exciting opportunity came when Lothringer in Munich, Lucy Gross, invited me to bring the blob to the actual exhibition space. And so what I had to do is choose my favorite compromises and kind of find images from these categories and then bring them to a real life space. That was kind of also, again, really a hard situation. But I found 5 of my, I think, the most important categories. And I took the map of the Lothringer, the exhibition space, and I started to use, again, these kinds of impossible image categories to use them as axes that cut the space of the Lothringer. And so first I made this kind of map, and then we printed the map and we created the map also in the real space. So here what you see is one axis that starts the exhibition. It's the axis of all possible images, which has just one work. You see it in the back, work by Fabian Heller. And then there is 3 categories. I'm gonna just talk briefly about 2 of my favorites. One of my favorites is the category of images based on speculation, disbelief, or imagination. One of the works on this category was by Ingrid Burrington. It's an artist from New York. And it's just a quote, forever known on a cloudless day. And she uses this as the title of her work to reference the NASA base map of Earth. And you see it, we printed it and put it on the wall next to it. What it kind of talks about is the problem that we think through the Earth as the way our scientific institutions such as NASA offer us the image of the world. And so what we have come to believe is that the image of the Earth is this place that has no darkness, it has no weather, and the perspective is Eurocentric, Western-centric. Certain countries here are squished, and those are just like 3 biases that are very, very heavily embedded within this map, but the map is more riddled with other types of bias. It's like filtered, but has come to believe an image we believe in. Another work in this axis was a work by Open Weather. It's a work by Sophie Dyer and Sascha Engelman. Sascha Engelman also came to give us a workshop, and during this workshop, she taught us how to use antennas, dipole antennas, to listen to, with the help of software-defined radio, to the electromagnetic frequency spectrum, and to actually listen through space, through the sounds of the satellites or the data that the satellites send us. We could record that and then transcode it to an actual map of the Earth. So what you're doing is you're tapping into a NOAA satellite, which is an American satellite, which means it's funded by the American people. And that's why the data that the NOAA satellites are sending to Earth, which is just a scan, 1 line at a time, it's openly accessible. And so you can actually just record what the satellite sees above you at the moment it's above you, transcode it into an image. And what you get then is a weather report. The compromise here is that we think through weather as an image that is about humidity, about pressure, and about temperature, usually. But weather is not just that. The weather reports we saw were weather reports that also included, for instance, all kinds of like pollutive clouds, etc. And so you get a whole other idea of weather can also be. And this work kind of like plays around with the idea of that the images of the weather that we get on a daily basis are very filtered and very, in a way, they compromise a lot of information. Finally, there was a second axis. It's the only axis I will talk about during this presentation. It was the axis of chronologies of impossibility. And what you see here, it's an image of one of the first Röntgen photos. And I put it here because this is an image that was once impossible, but has become possible since Wilhelm Röntgen kind of discovered Röntgen or X-ray radiation in 1895. It was per accident, but before he figured this out, Röntgen photos were totally impossible. These images were thought to be totally impossible. Another image in this axis was the pale blue dot. This is an image taken by the Voyager 1. It's an image that you can see it maybe a little bit. There's this little white dot in the middle of the monitor. And that's the image that the Voyager took when it, per request of Carl Sagan, turned the camera towards Earth while the Voyager was leaving our solar system. And this is the moment that the Earth was just 1 pixel big of the camera. So when the Voyager would go further, the Earth would become smaller than a pixel and would slowly disappear, be no longer possible to image. A final image on this axis is an image by Medipix, which is kind of an advanced version of Röntgen imaging. It's a type of imaging that is not yet possible in a way. it is possible, but with a very heavy time bounty. And it's a technology that CERN is developing. And what it can do is it can take Röntgen photos, sort of Röntgen photos, through the body, but find the color of every molecule it images and index that and make a photo, a 3D photo that you can slice through of any kind of object that you image. So those were just 2 axes. I see I have a little bit of time left, so I'm gonna show one more work that I really like. This was on the axis that is the low fidelity axis. It's a work by Peter Edwards. Here's a video of it that makes it a little bit more clear. What you see is just an audio-visual synthesizer. The audio comes from 3 channels, RGB. You can change the way the audio operates. You can make it into a square wave, a sine wave, a pulse wave. And this electric wave is then pushed towards the LED. The LED is, when you look from a little bit further away, it just looks like a pulsing. It is just a pulsing, but the pulsing is registered by your eyes as like kind of like a slow fading in and out. That's what your brain does to it. When you bring your phone closer, the phone that uses a CCD chip, it starts to fluctuate the frequency of the light faster than the CCD chip changes the kind of the electronic charge of the chip. And so what you get is the rolling shutter effect. It's a kind of interpretation of your CCD chip, of your phone, of this LED. It's impossible to actually kind of image. So kind of as a conclusion at this moment, I think it's very important that and this is actually a slide from the Glitch Studies Manifesto that I wrote in 2010. So it's very old, but I like to bring it up kind of as a closure. We have been conditioned to filter out noise, to consider and not consider noise anymore as something important. But even like in the research that I've been doing lately, I find that a lot of the noise actually gives us access to what is being compromised. And so while the tool for compromise can be a formula or a blob, I think it's also the noise has a very significant space there. Raw noise, decalibration, they can offer us some kind of extra trace evidence to an object we're trying to image. And they give us more information about that sound or that image. I think what could be really interesting while we are having a little discussion is maybe if people have an impossible image or want to talk more about this, I'm very open to receiving. My wish is to collect all impossible images in the world. So if there are any thoughts towards that, I'm very open to that. And I'm just looking through the chat now because I can see there is a question from Albert. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I'm just going to roll immediately into the questions. Albert, if you want to,
please do so.
Albert, if you want to, you can also open your mic and ask me with your voice.
Hello, my name is Albert. I was wondering that when you showed one of your slides which described images that are only possible through translation, for example, infrared images, or I think the one specific example you showed was putting an antenna through the eye socket.
I don't think I was talking about that, or maybe, oh, it's the one here. This one you mean? Yes, yeah, it's there. Oh, funny you picked that. Yeah.
So I was wondering that it also mentioned, let's say, infrared images. What is the difference between that and, let's say, an image of an X-ray? Because essentially they're both images that was not possible, but now through certain technology are possible, aren't they?
Yeah, I think what you're asking is while a category like, for instance, images that can be transcoded or perceived via a different type of technology. You're saying an antenna in eye socket. You're referencing to a remark I made about the eyes are just listening or seeing a particular part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Other parts of that electromagnetic spectrum we are entering with antennas that listen, for instance, to FM or AM, but it's all the same electromagnetic frequency spectrum. So what if you could use them in your eye socket? That's what you're referencing. And then you're asking, what is actually the difference if back in the days we didn't have antennas or the knowledge of the electromagnetic frequency spectrum? Wasn't that also an impossible image at some point? And the answer is yes, sure. I think certain images can exist within different categories. I think the category that I have about time-based or chronology-based impossible images, where I positioned X-rays, is more to think also that there is the space of not knowing what will be possible in the future. And so I don't have a category for that yet. Well, whereas this transcoded category is a category in itself because we now have those technologies. But in essence, they're overlapping. So I think an image can be impossible because of different reasons. And so I don't see them as a clear-cut categorization, but more like sometimes overlapping. Does that answer your question, Albert?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the thought process behind the categorization. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a, this is an artistic categorization. One day when I have the chance to talk to a scientist and they can like really scrutinize it, I think it will be even more interesting. But I'm very happy with my my process of feeling where the categories are. Like it's just a kind of like an analysis by myself at this point. Yeah. I see another question by Mario Shebela. Sorry for not pronouncing your. Oh, please wait. Oh, it's just a remark. There will be time for questions, and then that video. Curious what you make of Lidar and 3D scanning becoming a stock option on personal devices, and if that may be transformative in various ways in your mind. I'm trying to see if that video, are you in the video? You're pointing, but I don't know where you're pointing at. Anyway, that video, if you want to open your mic, you're more than welcome to say hi. But I'm so excited about Lidar technology becoming part of our normal, or normal's a big word because it's just rich people's phones. I see a lot of my students working with Lidar right now, and they are connecting different types of storytelling already. Like they scan 3D spaces, but then also connect it to other materials. And so what that does to me, and what I'm very, very excited about, is that now we have computers that can connect materials with different dimensions, both in time and space. This becomes really normal, but it means that back in the days I was very annoyed with the way how video is just linear, and how while you're going through a video, you cannot have multiple timelines or like layers on top of each other, or switch out soundtracks, right? Not to say that Lidar technology is video technology, but it is time-based. It can be a time-based experience. And what is now a time-based experience there's so many new openings and dimensions in our time-based experiences. And that means that I think the realms of images are being redefined. Lidar technology is exciting, but machine learning algorithms in the realms of image processing are even more crazy to me, and maybe also scary and exciting. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question? Jess, tell me.
There's a leaf blower outside, so sorry for the noise. Maybe it's relevant. One of the categories I didn't see, and you may or may not be interested in it, is biometric data as an impossible set of images and translations. Like, for example, I'm type 1 diabetic, so I've got a CGM on, right? It takes interstitial fluid data, uses Bluetooth to send it to my insulin pump. This does some forecasting with the data and translates it to approximate blood level. And then it scrubs back and forth for how much insulin I need based on the last 5 minutes and patterns over 30 days. So it uses machine learning. It's all really cool, but one of the impossible images that I can see in this, because I pay attention aside from the CGM data, is I can tell how stressed I am based on my cortisol levels, and that's not measured. And I can also tell where I am in my hormone cycle, because progesterone causes resistance. So like I've been begging my medical researcher friends to add these sort of like confounding variables to the machines so that more people can be aware of, like, anyway. So this is a whole field that's like super wonderful. It's like riddled with problems and errors in the forecasting, but it's like, it's fantastic. And it turns it into an image, right? So like it's data viz, but we have a picture of what the inside of my body looks like. So that's wonderful.
Wow, Jess, thank you for all that. I remember your performance from also a decade ago, where you were eating an apple and you would keep us updated about your sugar levels.
Yeah, that was all manual. That was all like haptic. I didn't have a CGM. They didn't have CGMs and pumps back then. So yeah.
I am so scared about, I mean, I understand it's very important for you, and I understand it's very helpful, but also the introduction of machine learning in this type of medical, like personalized medical equipment, right? Like,
there's an exploit in one of the systems that I don't have. It's not Medtronic, but right now you can calculate, you can insert insulin into people's bodies, like by proxy. It's kind of scary. I don't have that system.
Wow. Yeah, it just reminds me of the video by Alan Warburton. It's where he really describes what machine learning kind of does for us also, besides giving us new types of images, unimaginable images. It also gives us a whole space of prediction, right? And in your case, it's very clear, it's useful most of the time, but he talks about how we can also see other types of diseases maybe in photos, because you can compare particular things towards particular data sets, and then you can start to recognize diseases that were not even known someone would have, and implications that can have, not just to people that don't want to know, but imagine insurance, and insurance just requesting or Googling a particular set of images from someone. And I mean, that's very far. That's not possible maybe right now, but it's where we're heading also. It's very scary.
Oh yeah, I think this data is definitely being uploaded from my primary care system to my insurance company. Eventually that will impact my behavior, will impact my price tag, right?
Wow.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, for sure.
Super scary. I see 2 hands up. I don't know who was first, but I'm going to Marius. I think you need to unmute yourself, Marius.
Marius, are you coming?
Yes.
Or should I ask first?
No,
okay,
no.
Go for it.
Sorry, I think you were first, but anyway, so thank you very, very, very much for this very inspiring talk. I'd like to add kind of a philosophical question maybe. And also because you just said this phrase of an unimaginable image, which I really like. So I think really, I think after your talk, I have a different understanding now of what an image is, because before I really thought the image is the thing that I see, but right now I think the image is the thing that is created in my brain of what I see, and that makes a difference. And also because you started with this impossible sound in space, because sound cannot be communicated through the vacuum, but with this understanding that the sound is the thing that comes to life in my brain. Of course, there can be sound in space, and I can hear things like a rainbow or a planet constellation or whatever. And I love this idea so much. This is really awesome. So my question would be that, I mean, on the one hand, you have these impossible images, and often they are related to maybe technical improvements or new developments. But you also have this idea of images and how biased they are, like the one with the Google Earth or NASA image. So I was wondering if which of these two aspects is more important, or if you want to say a little bit more about this bias thing, because I also think that images allow us to kind of or they form how we think about the world and how we think about things, like also with the diabetes data. They help us to imagine difficult to understand things. So but at the same time they always come with a bias, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's maybe not so good. What do you think about that?
Thank you for that question, Marius. First of all, it's nice that you brought back the what the image is and your consideration of that the concept of the image might now be expanded. I really do take an artistic liberty to expand the idea, the understanding of an image, and I think that's fine, because all images are constructed. So there is also always a bias. The bias is the lens, it's the context, it's the perspective we choose. It's also like there's always a back of the image, as Hito Style also says. So the bias, we need a bias because we need filtering. Like one impossible image that I received while I was in a microscopic lab was that at this point, the microscopes are so strong that they can take such big images that they can actually no longer be really computed at once or understood at once. So there's no more point to create a whole image out of that data. So again, filtering is just important to make sense of the images. And we do that on a daily basis. Now the problem is not necessarily, I mean, some biases are absolutely horrid. There is a lot of research right now on biases that are, for instance, racist. That is absolutely something we need to stop immediately. But on the flip side of that is that I think we need to also learn to understand that compromise and bias is just also a part of our daily realities. And we just need to acknowledge and learn to see it, to kind of like record, hey, here is a bias. And then also to kind of mark that bias in the images that we take, especially when we use it for, you know, whatever scientific method or so does that answer your question? Because you were talking, okay, cool, okay, yeah, I did quite a bit of research on particular types of racist bias in images. It's under a work that I titled Behind White Shadows, if you want to look into that more. Yeah, I see, Albert, you have your hand up. Please.
Hi. I unfortunately don't remember who it was who mentioned the concept of impossible sound, that the fact that you cannot hear sound in space. And that led me to think about one conversation I had with one of my professor about different mechanisms which sound effects are being generated. And one of it is through pure imagination or visual stimulus. So because of what you hear or other stimulus except for auditory stimulus, that you think you heard something. And that led me to think about if there are also impossible images that are only being seen by certain people, but cannot be reproduced and be seen from others. And I must say, I am not familiar with how exactly synesthesia work, but whether that would also be considered as a kind of impossible image.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think it's a, I think you actually connected a few things together that are all very important and interesting to think through, like the mechanism that makes sound also you mentioned. What I think is really interesting is, and I talk about that with friend quite a bit, is that many cultures, so you're now talking about just the body in general, like some people can have synesthesia and others not. I don't know how synesthesia works. I think it's a connection of something in your sensual perception and your brain, or that connection happening in your brain, and that's where they leak over and bring us like kind of impossible connections somehow. But when you're saying this, I'm immediately thinking about Zimbabwean culture, where, for instance, they still don't have, or for a long time at least, they didn't have a name for the color blue, or the actual translation for a corner. Imagine if you don't have those words in your culture, you perceive and understand the world also very differently. So I think there's a combination of culture, language, and of the body that is also very important to consider here, to make that makes things impossible. Yeah.
What you're saying, if a concept is not present in a culture, then it is also not present in the mind, so to speak.
Yeah, then it's unknowable, I think. I do think that there must be a critical space where somehow there becomes a momentum for something to become known. But in general, we need the conceptualization is a very complex space where knowledge gets built. And if a culture just does not engage a particular object or understanding of an object, then it's not part of the thinking through that object. And that means it doesn't get, or it won't get conceptualized easily. This is a little bit out of my, I'm sure that there's people that actually know a lot more about this. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing to think through. I'm reading Martina's question in the chat. It's, do you call all scientific images impossible? And do you know the work of Victoria Vesna? I have to Google the work. Hi, is that you?
Hi, yeah.
Nice to see you.
I just typed first so that you can see the question first. So thank you for your talk. I'm also working at the Science Visualization Lab. So I'm constantly working with scientific images, and that's why also I posed this question, because I never thought of scientific images actually as impossible images, because yeah, it's data translation into images. But I like how you think about the impossibility of this. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to answer the question?
I think once a scientific apparatus has been built, and it can deal with the data and create, like manage that and create an image out of it, that image is clearly possible then. So I don't think that all scientific images are impossible, but I think scientists deal with a lot of compromises and a lot of translations, or a lot of translations that involve a lot of compromise. And I think that's where I want to kind of have more authority, or create a way to gain more authority into seeing and understanding where those compromises are happening throughout the process of creating new ways of dealing with data. And so I think a compromise, just very simply, is like to make something resolve in one way and not in another. And that can be just like an image width and height, or it can be like, you know, there's all these like different types of,
so like a new
vectors.
translation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the choice to see something in a particular, to transcode it in a certain way. And so not just scientists, everyone is using compromises, and through those compromises, images that have not been created are being deleted, forgotten, unthought through, etc. And so at a certain point, they become impossible because they're no longer part of the mindset. And so I don't consider all scientific images impossible, but I do understand science, but also just image making in general, as a tool for creating unknown thoughts as well as known thoughts. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I totally like this way of thinking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just suggested you also look into the work of Victoria Wesner, because she works a lot also with new ways of creating images. She also worked with, that's why I totally thought of her. She also worked with sound of space, out of space. So it was the project, I think it was called Alien Stardust. Yeah, so yeah.
Thank you.
That
Thank
was
you,
just
Martina.
more a remark than a question, yeah.
I see Maria's writing maybe also dreams, and I absolutely agree. It was really nice that the woman that was working with the not the archive, but they were working in like the data center of CERN. Her impossible image was an image of her daughter, herself, her mother, all of the same age in a frame. And to me, that's like kind of like, it's not a dream, but I thought it was so nice that you're talking to a scientist. And I was really trying to push my language towards the standard of like a physics space. But then some people also tried to come towards me, and they were talking through these like imaginary impossible images. So dreams are also like, yeah, absolutely an impossible image. I see Rudiger. Rudiger, tell me. Eten bij de internet.
I think, Rüdiger, you also have to turn your microphone on.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, I didn't turn it on. Sorry. Yeah, my question was actually going exactly the way you were just going now. Is where do you draw the line? Like, because if you think about it theoretically, then of course most images are impossible. Because I mean, like once I have an imagination, once I have to translate the image I have in my head to you, it becomes an impossible image, doesn't it? Or is it just, am I just misunderstanding the concept totally?
No, I think in a way you're right, but I think it's not necessarily about the impossible image as much as understanding that there is always something compromised, and that becomes often impossible. And so what I'm
Exactly,
not, what I'm not after is say like maybe all impossible or all possible images and drawing any lines. What I'm trying to do is I am really trying to learn and teach myself to think through compromise as much as that I'm just taking in whatever is served to me. And I think it's very important to understand and to kind of build a way of understanding to perceive where the steps to translations, etc., are happening, and to make that more part of like a general understanding of images as a broader concept. And so I think it's really more about a frame set and an understanding of the way we make sense of the world, capture the world, right? That there is a large part is touched through compromise, and that becomes really I always say like it should be part of our high school already, to learn that compromise happens in in almost all of our actions, and that is something to be aware of somehow. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. If I may rephrase what I think I understood, is from my perception, I think the basic thing is that it's better to start with assuming that there's a misunderstanding than to start that there's understanding.
I didn't follow the last part of that sentence.
No. And I would say, if I look at an image, nowadays I would say that most people think that they're seeing the same image, whatever image it is. If two people look at the same image, they look at the same image. They think they see the same image. But actually, many times it's actually advantageous to assume that they're not looking at the same image. Because if they start, but by this, they have a much deeper understanding of what they're searching for. Perceived understanding, from my point of view, is a very deep pitfall.
Yeah.
Am I totally confusing?
No.
Or is it understandable?
No. I think for me, oh, sorry. I think we're having some lagging. We're cutting each other. I think, again, what for me is very important is to introduce the concept of compromise into a very as a very normative way of also, or like to really embed it in our thinking. And I think it connects kind of to what Evil Copy also writes in the chat. So from what I can understand, is your goal to be able to facilitate a method of data interpretation that's capable of having as many dimensions as possible to remove compromises or to widen the filter of images captured. So my goal is not necessarily to have as many dimensions, but for people, users, creators, engineers, designers, artists, for them to understand that there are more dimensions possible and that they can actively choose to go into another dimension. So we don't need to always have all the dimensions at our fingertips, because then we have too many options. But at the moment we really want to say something, do something, understand the method in which we're making sense of something or we're sensing something, then we need to be aware that there are multiple dimensions that we are not having as in a standard toolkit, but that we can draw from and also perceive through. And so it's not necessarily for us to get into an ungoverned, unorganized flow of data. I think that's super useless, but it is for a more fluid way of opening up and seeing our data streams. Does that answer you and also Evil Copy?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And it totally makes sense. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Are there any other final thoughts. Yeah, I was just calling for that. Like, let's have final thoughts.
Last question, please.
I saw Marius putting a finger up.
But
yes.
If anyone else wants to go, don't be shy. Okay, so maybe one last question. So I think maybe one of the aspects that I learned from what you said is, and also you talk about these compromises. So maybe it's about how we look at images and create some kind of new new practice of looking at images that make us more open to see maybe the compromises, the contextualization, and to change our own viewpoint in regard to images, so that things that were not possible before now become kind of thinkable, and maybe it's also a type of sensation together with this thinking and how we perceive images. And then as my background is more from the sound discipline, I try to relate this also to sound. So maybe it's not only true for images, this idea of impossible images. And I think the most, for me, the most important thing that you said today is really this type of context and compromise, and it means really to be even more open when looking at images, to see all these new things that were impossible maybe before, and that change also my own way how I think about things and everything.
Thank you, Marius. Yeah, I think when it comes to sound, there's a whole analogy there, and maybe it's just the same. But when I think through sound, immediately the example of the MP3 compression comes up in my mind. The MP3 compression is a compression that is lossy, so it cuts away sounds that are not important for the human ear to actually still hear. It's a compression made for music, so to still hear the music as well as possible. I was gonna say as photorealistic as possible, but it's a joke. So the MP3 compression was made, when was it? Like, I forgot when it was, must be around the 70s in Germany. And maybe it's later, but it's a compression that was tested. But just as with the JPEG compression, it was tested just on one object. In the case of the JPEG compression, it was Lena. It's a well-known story. Lena was a white Playboy centerfold. So what you get is a racist compression in a sense. The MP3 compression was only tested on Suzanne Vega's I Am Sitting in the Corner. So it's also a compression that has a super thick inherent bias for Western music, a particular type of vocal, and it's not been tested on any other types of percussion or maybe different types of music genres. And so there is some researchers, I'm trying to catch the name, but I can't in my head from the top of my head right now. They're doing research into what music can actually not be well compressed by the MP3 compression. And so what is going on here is that we have like basically a lost field of music that for a long time would get totally bit crushed by compression. There are compressions that there are standards that are too good, they're too heavy, they're not being implemented. There are standards that are proprietary, and so people have to pay for them. There's a lot of resolutions out there that are no longer inside the inside our daily use. They're being compromised for whatever reason, and that's as much in images as it is in sound, and even in our sound softwares. Meaning, like, I'm thinking about Ableton Live. Like, if you listen long enough to music of today, you'll just hear Ableton Live at some point. Like, I hear very, 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 yeah, we can go on to that, but a lot of types of music are being almost compromised. They're not thought through or created because of the standard softwares that we have now. So there's obviously a very clear analogy towards that register of thinking. And noise is sound, like applause, etc. Yeah, and also, by the way, like when Jess was talking about leaf blower, Zoom has an incredible noise reduction algorithm, but it also deletes kind of a very physical, very intimate part of where we are, right? And Zoom has a very good making your face prettier algorithm too, and it deletes our time from our faces if we choose to use it. So there's so many spaces to go and think through, but you know, we're supposed to keep this short, so we're gonna cut. Thank you, and thank you, Jeanette. I see you here.
Hello, Jeanette.
Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you for this really, really nice talk. I will end now the SubnetTALK recording